What?
Oh, Vaughn posted a picture. He said, I was looking for Valentine themes.
Hey everybody. Welcome, welcome. I hope everyone's doing well. Let me do my proper salutations. I hope everyone's doing well. Uh Oh, something's going on. Hold on, hold on. Something's lagging. Please hold. Here. All right, we're going to do this here, okay? And then we're just going to close this. I'm trying. I don't know what's running in my background. Well, I know a few things that are running that are probably in the way, but this has never been an issue. Okay, I think I got it fixed. Maybe. Okay, I think I got it fixed. Hello? Okay, I think this is better. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, guys. This is really weird. It never runs like this for me normally. Hello. Yeah, you guys just gonna have to bear with me for a little bit. I'm sorry. until I can figure out what the heck is going on with my machine. Which is so wild to me. Because again, this was running fine earlier. But anyway, hi guys. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. Let's see. Trying to grab some stuff so we can get ready for the creepy stuff. I know I can take my time. I hate it because I'm like, why is stuff lagging out? I don't understand. It shouldn't be. I think it's better now though. Well, I don't know. Maybe. I might have wishful thinking going on. Yeah, I was running fine yesterday. I really don't know what's going on. Oh well. I will figure it out as we go. In the meantime though, let's just jump into it. But yeah, I have a few stories for you guys. I'm not going to be doing it for too long. I'm not going to be streaming for too long because, well, if you guys were there for yesterday's stream, I did kill Final Fantasy. And that didn't help because that already, I don't know. It's Streamlabs lagging out for some reason. I don't know why. And like VTube Studio is also running hot. I don't understand. I literally used this yesterday and it shouldn't be a thing. But yeah, we're gonna do this real quick. Pause it, and I'm gonna figure out what the heck is going on with everything right now. Yeah, it's Streamlabs and freaking VTube Studio that's running hot, and I don't know why. They shouldn't be. I mean, maybe I overdid it on stream yesterday, but this shouldn't be an issue. And I'm really kind of pissed off about it. What the hell is going on? Yeah, hold on. It might be. Give me one sec. Oh, I gotta pull up Spotify again. Hold on. Yeah, there is something going on, and I don't know what is going on. It's what the heck is going? I really don't know what's happening. So, hmm. Yeah, it's like Streamlabs and VTube Studio are fighting each other. We might just have to do without it today, guys. Sorry. Until I can figure out what's happening. Yep, we're just gonna have to do that. Because, like I said, I think Streamlabs and VTube Studio are just fighting each other, and I don't know why. And it's like making me angry. But anyway, so sorry, guys. You're gonna have to just deal without it. My bad. But yeah. Don't worry. I have water. We're ready to go. I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. Since I kind of wore my voice out yesterday, I'm gonna do like maybe 3 stories that I'm actually gonna read. Gonna kind of make this a short stream. But yeah, so let's get started. Gotta switch to the bonfire. Yeah, there we go. All right, time for scary, spooky times. Okay, gonna copy the story link. Please feel free to follow along as I read aloud. It's probably going to be a mix, Hussein. Like, I'll probably put, like, maybe 1 or 2, like, throwbacks in there. All right, here we go. Hi there. I'm going to be writing this down as a therapeutic exercise. Ugh, I hate these therapists thinking they can help. Trust me that after the events I'll soon be retelling, they can't help. No one can help. What I've seen, you can't just forget about it. No. It's something that's burned forever into my mind. It was one of those days, those kind of days you just want to go home, sleep, and forget about the day before. God knows why, could not have this simple luxury. I'll start off by saying that I've had a fairly average 27 years of my life. Not much ever really happened to me. I stayed out of trouble, kept to myself, got good grades, so on and so on. Even after school, I got a job working for an old friend at one of those dreadful desk jobs. Enough about my childhood, because what happened on that late October evening began a series of events that led to the worst few days of my life. I was on my way home from work at about 8, I guess. I, for some idiotic reason, decided to walk to work today, not knowing how late I'd be at the office. I live in a quiet neighborhood. That is, of course, with the exception of my upstairs neighbor who loves his parties. On the way to my apartment, I passed the small park. Of course, it being late at night, no one was there. In fact, I ended up being quite wrong, as there was most assuredly someone over there. As I looked closer, I could make out a blood red tie and the reflection of the street lamps glancing off to what I had guessed a pair of shades. That's when I got this feeling that whoever was there wasn't just a random stranger. No, he seemed to have a bigger reason for sitting there. That's when I could feel that behind those shades, his eyes were trying to burrow their way into me. He never broke gaze, even when a bird flew right past his head. I sped up and tried to keep a good distance between me and the park as much as I could. This is where it had become worse, much worse. As I had just turned the corner, I could hear the audible clap of shoes on the sidewalk. My face grew horridly pale at this sudden interruption. In this otherwise hushed hour of the night, when I heard this, I knew at that moment how dire my current situation was. I had that innate survival instinct that we all have that makes the hair on the back of your neck shoot straight up and goosebumps run up and down your body. At this point, he began to get so loud that it was as if he had merely been behind me that whole time. I was just outright confused at how quickly he managed to make his way to me without me taking any further hint of it. I thought how I had rounded the corner, and even then he was just starting to follow. Had I been that deaf to the sinister stalker? I booked it up to my apartment on the third floor and could hardly even open the blasted door as I was shaking so hard. I opened the door and slammed it closed so hard as to rattle the shelf nearest me. I slowly slid down with my back to the door. I began to shake so much that even the old wooden door had shook with me. I started to take deep breaths until I could at least control myself. I then remembered how close he came to me and realized that he may have seen me run all the way up here. I mean, he covered a whole block before I realized him the second time. I jumped up, still panting hard, and peered out the peephole. I held my breath as not to attract his attention any more than I have already. The odd thing, though, was that all I could see was just blackness. I then wiped the glass, thinking maybe something could be obstructing the view. When I looked back, there was no more blackness, though I now wish there would have been. No. It was instead replaced by an eye. A grotesque, disfigured, pure red eye. I gasped mistakenly loudly at this and jumped back, soon realizing that I had assured it to where I was. Though, as he continued to stare, I had an epiphany. He didn't require any assurance at all of where I lived. Oh no, he already knew that. When I recovered from my shock, I looked back through once more, hoping not to regret it this time, only to see nothing, or even stranger, not even hear any opening or closing of doors. Did that mean that he was just waiting for me to open up? To just look out so that he could barge his way in and do God knows what to me? No, I wasn't going to play his games. No, I would lock the deadbolt, grab my gun, set it on the nightstand, and go to bed. I thought to myself to be so brilliant, so ingenious. No one would ever get past me and my girl, I said to myself, a bit too loudly perhaps. I was a fool, such a blasted fool for not calling the cops and reporting what had happened. Even if I would have sounded crazy, at least someone would have known about it. No, like the arrogant man I was, I got out my gun, set it out for me to grab in case, and tried to go to sleep. I tossed and turned for what seemed like ages. No matter what I dreamt of, it only got worse. I dreamt of ever worsening things, yet what haunted me most was that gruesome looking eye. All I could see was that eye forever burnt into my mind. It was as if I was seeing that man again, that he was still here with me. It made me feel as though he had never even left the place. It even felt like some cold, dragged out breath flowed out down my neck. I immediately snapped awake, realizing the one horrifying thought: I wasn't dreaming of that. The hairs on my neck were erect with fear as I sat straight up in bed. I noticed how cold I was. It was as if my body was telling me something was there, hiding just beyond my view, stalking in the shadowy corners of my room. I squinted my eyes, straining to see something, anything to confirm my suspicions of what might be lurking. That's when, and I swear to God, I saw the slightest shimmer in the shadows. That shimmer, it looked as if it were sunglasses? My jaw dropped at the one thought that shook every fiber of my being, that the thing of a man was here with me. At this realization, I threw off my sheets and reached for my gun. I couldn't believe it. There was no gun on my nightstand. This was all wrong. I would never misplace it, and I would have heard it if it fell. No, it had to be here. It had to. Oh God, he took it. That shadow that I thought I saw, he'd taken my gun. I couldn't take this anymore. I had to get somewhere safe, but I also couldn't leave the apartment. He might be there too. God, I was getting crazier by the moment. At this thought, I sprinted out of the room, down the hall, and into my closet, slamming it and locking it. I started to cry. I just couldn't help it. This was insane. That's when I heard him again. A slow, patient clapping of shoes down the hall, finally stopping at the closest door where I hid. I heard a quiet scratching coming from the other side. It was slow and deliberate, as if it was writing something. It soon stopped and shuffled back to the main door, and quietly exiting the apartment, I then cried to myself to sleep. The next morning, I awoke with a start, forgetting where I had fallen asleep. I got up and opened the door to see that it all wasn't just a nightmare like I had wished. My heart skipped a beat when, as I saw on the other side of the door, was scratched in the words, "You can run." At this, I started to tear up again and knew I was in for one heck of a ride. For how long? I could only hope for a quick one. I, of course, would not be so lucky as to have a quick and forgiving end. I thought of calling off work, but felt that it had to be safe there. I quickly got dressed, grabbed my bag, and walked downstairs. After what happened last night, I was not taking a risk again, so I took my bike. I wasn't too far away from the office, so it only took 15 minutes or so to get there. Once I was there, I went about my usual business, typing up forms, signing papers, and the occasional email. I was finally starting to feel better when lunch rolled around, so I decided to go meet up with my friend to see if he wanted to head out to get lunch. He agreed, and we headed off outside to one of the many picnic tables sitting around the lawn. He said he wanted the one over by the woods. Of course he would, I thought, as it was our typical spot. I don't know why he liked it. Just perhaps the calming sounds and the birds sing and the pines sway in the breeze. As we ate, I felt off. As if, no, there's no way he could have possibly followed me here. He left last night. I mean, I heard the door close and everything. Obviously, he wouldn't be here. I was just being paranoid. Yeah, that was it. Just natural old paranoia. "Hey, you okay, buddy?" my friend asked me. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little preoccupied, you know? I answered back. Why didn't I tell him about what happened? He was my best friend. I'm sure he could understand or at least humor me. Oh well, I'll just be more careful during the nighttime, I guess. Maybe I'll... What was that? I saw something, I swear it. This time it wasn't paranoia. What was it? I thought to myself as I squinted to get a better look. Oh my God, no. It couldn't be. Was that a shimmer? Jesus, it was. No, it can't be. There's no way he or it could have followed me here. My friend must have noticed, my mouth open in blank stare as he asked me, "Hey man, what is it? What you looking at?" At this, he turned around and looked at the woods before looking back at me and asking, "You must be seeing something I'm not." He began to chuckle at this, and I snapped out of my trance and laughed with him, saying, Yeah, I guess it was just a bird or whatever. Yeah, a bird. I could only wish that it was, but I had a feeling in that pit of my stomach that said otherwise. After lunch, we went our ways and back onto our little cubicles. I sat down and began to type, trying to pass what I had seen as nothing, hoping for my sake that it was just a bird like I had said it was. That's when my suspicions and greatest fear began to materialize right before my eyes. An email notification popped up, and expecting it to be another dreadful memo, I opened it. A picture of the building? I thought to myself, that doesn't seem like something in a memo. Even stranger, there was nothing with it other than the picture. You would think, huh? It was another email. All right, I guess this one will have to wait. Except this was a picture of the building from the west side. Okay, this was getting really weird. Another and another and another email. What is going on? I was starting to get really scared. The pictures then led to the woods, then a picnic table. Now there were 2 people. Oh no. No. It was me and my friend. I started to tear up at the sudden realization that thing had tracked me here. This was no prank by someone. No, this was that monster tracking me down. The final picture was a zoomed in shot of my face when I had noticed that shimmer. I was terrified now he had found me in a place where I thought I was safest and completely destroyed that one last hope I had. Another email. What the heck could he want? He's already shown me the picture. What else? Oh God. What did that mean? All this email said was, but you can't hide. Oh no, that was it. He destroyed any will I had left. I needed somewhere else, somewhere so far out there that's it. My friend's cabin. That's perfect. It was secluded and there was no obvious path to get there. That would be where I could sleep till I figured out a permanent solution to all this. I went to the bathroom to clean up and make it look like I hadn't been crying. I didn't want him worrying. After I was ready, I headed on over to his office, knocked on the door. Come in, he called, and as I walked in, he asked, with the widest grin on his face, Oh, hey, bud, what's going on? Hey, I was wondering if you could do me a favor, I asked him. Of course I can. What is it you need? He asked me joyously. Would you mind if I borrow your cabin for the night? I just need to get some fresh air for a bit, you know? Sure. And from the looks of it, you could use some, he laughed. I just nodded and asked if he could leave the door unlocked. Sure, no problem. Hope you get the relaxation you need. He smiled. I just nodded and said thanks, leaving his office. I had just punched out for the day at around 6. I thought, this time I wasn't going to be as dark as it was yesterday. That's good. I ran downstairs, took the elevator, that is, because running down 12 flights of stairs did not sound all that fun. That's when I bumped into my friend on the way out, and he offered to give me a ride out to the cabin. I took the offer thinking that if I could put some real distance between me and that stalker, then I should be fine. We drove for about 30 to 40 minutes out to the woods and turned down a dirt path that was pretty well hidden. That is, unless you knew what to be looking for. That's good. It should be near impossible for him to follow now. Of course, it had already proven me wrong before. When we finally got there, I was relieved to finally be somewhere that seemed as safe as it got. Safe was far from what it was and what would precede the coming night. He unlocked the door and let me in, giving me the rundown on what was where and pointing out that he had a spare car out back. He said it didn't have a radio or anything real nice, but worked great if I needed it at all. He showed me where the car keys were hanging and then headed back out to his own place in town. I thanked him again and started walking around the house checking it out. It was a pretty basic cabin with just a bedroom, kitchen, living room, bathroom, and some closets. Oh yeah, I thought, more closets, just what I like to sleep in. Ugh. I was so tired I was starting to make dumb jokes at my own expense. I got ready for bed and began another night of tossing and turning as I embraced another dreadful rest. God, I couldn't sleep no matter how much I tried. That creature had finally managed to burrow his way into my mind. All I saw was that terrible eye from the peephole and the slow, methodical clapping of shoes, followed by that horrifying scratching on the door. I shot awake once more, drenched in a cold sweat. I sighed out loud, thinking about how real all that noise had seemed, but realizing it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I had to get some sleep if I was going to be at least a little bit functional in the morning. I had only come out here for the night, so I had to make the best of my stay. I got out of bed to go make some tea, hoping it would calm me down enough that I could catch some Z's. I scavenged around the nearly empty cupboards and cabinets. This makes sense, though, as my friend hadn't been out here since summer. I found some green tea bags hidden away on a top shelf and started mixing some up immediately. I grabbed my mug of tea and groggily stumbled towards the sliding glass door at the back of the cabin. I sipped on my tea for a while, just taking it all in for a bit. This felt odd. I expected that thing to have been here by now, stalking me, chasing me down and making me run for it all over again. I guess I had been right. It hadn't followed me out here. God, how many times would I be wrong before realizing how naive I was being? On my way back to the room, I saw something that stopped my heart and made all the despair come rushing back. On the door was scratched once more. They can never hide. I dropped my mug as I read this and knew that the clapping of shoes and scratching I thought I had merely dreamt of was real. The mug smashing snapped me out of my horrific realization, and that's when I heard it. It was that blasted clapping, that unavoidable clapping of shoes. It was here. It had found me. It was angry for me, trying to escape, and wanted to finish this game of cat and mouse once and for all. The clapping got louder and faster, and it was coming straight for me. I looked to the side just in time to see the creature's shades glinting in the moonlight. It crouched down and got ready to pounce on me as if it were a lion and I was its gazelle. I spun on my heels and jumped out of the hall and back into the kitchen just as it launched itself at me. I fell onto my back when I landed and looked up to see it recovering from the kill that it had missed. That's when it looked at me and smirked as if it thought me disabled. And oh, was it right? The creature merely walked over to me as I listened to the clapping of its shoes. I started to crawl back away from him, but I had only reached the sink by the time he caught up and picked me up by the neck. It began to choke me to death when I noticed something in the sink. It was some frying pans. My friend must have cleaned them and was too lazy to put them back. This was it, I thought. This was how I would get this creep off me. My hand shot out to grab a pan, but he was too fast. He just shot his hand out and grabbed mine before I could even realize it. At this action, I immediately kicked my foot up as high as it could go, and it worked. It had actually taken him by surprise, and I smiled as my foot connected with the bottom of his jaw and it sent him back a few steps. I saw this opportunity, reached for the pan, and swung it with all my weight, again connecting as he jumped at me. This time, I sent him to the ground, also accomplishing to smash his shades in the process. That's when I saw those grotesque red eyes again that had scared me the night before, but this time, that nightmarish creature had a fire burning in its eyes. Its frown baring its teeth, if you could call them that. I say this because where his teeth should have been now looked as if someone had ripped them out and replaced them with jagged, bloody shrapnel that hardly resembled teeth. I threw the pan at it and ran for the back door, reaching for the car keys hanging up next to it. I blasted through the door and ran for the car, knowing that it was my final hope. I got to the car, jumped in, trying to turn it on, but the motor wouldn't turn over. That's when I saw it racing out of the house and coming straight at me while it snarled, showing its jagged teeth once more. I slammed my fist down on the dashboard and tried it again, and as cliche as it sounds, it turned on. That's when it pounced onto the hood, staring down at me, and that's when I floored it. It smacked against the windshield and then went sailing off when I slammed on the brakes. I thought I would send it tumbling, only to find out how graceful that hellspawn was, as it planted its foot and pivoted around, letting his other foot land behind him and plunging his claw-like hands into the ground, almost immediately halting his slide backwards. I didn't take any more time admiring how he had done that and punched the gas yet again. This time, when I hit him hard. I practically flattened the thing. Of course, I didn't even stop to check if it was dead. I just drove ahead. That's when I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing nobody lying there. I ignored this, though, as I knew nothing could have survived that impact. I mean, its body basically smashed the bumper back into the car. No, I knew it was dead, and that it would never come to haunt me again. Not much happened after that, except that I had a falling out with my friend for trashing not only the car, but scratching on the door and the other messes I made fighting the monster. That's okay, though, as I still work there, but I did move to a new apartment. Too many bad memories. It's been a couple years since the whole incident, and I've been getting along pretty well. I actually got an email from my old friend saying he wanted to come by and end on a different note. I guess we did end on a bad note with a fight and all, but I think that's him now. I can hear the clapping of shoes coming down the hall. Very funny, man. Now quit scratching on the door and get in here. Odd. He won't stop. Oh well. I'll just open the door for him. I'll have to remember to finish this entry later. Yeah, Jinx, this guy's a really slow learner. Okay. Let's see if I can find a short video. What the heck is going on? All right. We'll do this one real quick. Do you guys know that one person you work with, the one that nobody likes? Yeah, well, there used to be someone like that at my old workplace. I say my old workplace because, well, yeah, it's not really there anymore. And I'm pretty sure I'm one of the few people that actually knows what happened. Work is a strange environment. Sometimes the only thing you have in common with the people that you're forced to share physical space with is that you walk on the same carpet from 9 to 5 that they do. It's like having a whole shitload of roommates without any choice in the matter. Research by sociologists and psychologists into the nature of work, capital W, has found that factors like the working conditions and interpersonal relationships between employees are much more important determinants of workplace satisfaction than things most people would think of, like, say, salary, which, by the way, in my case was shit. I think the reason places like the break room or kitchen or whatever it might be called at your particular place of work can elevate the tension between employees is because they're shared spaces. You're just trying to eat your fucking lunch without having to listen to that guy a table over keep slurping his fucking noodles and make you hate your life even more than you already do because you're an office drone and your timesheet's overdue. Or you're trying not to be annoyed by the fact that someone keeps leaving big piles of dirty fucking dishes in the sink and randomly eating people's food out of the fridge. It's worse than living with a bad roommate because you'll never be able to figure out just who that fucker is. You don't even know who to blame. And even if you did, you probably wouldn't know him anyway, the guy from cubicle 4451.
It's that kind of behavior that makes human beings sharing space with other human beings bring out the worst in them and cause people to resort to measures of amazing passive aggressiveness, like posting notes on the break room fridge written in all caps, calling out the fucker who's eating everyone's food, and hoping that bastard will stop. He won't. In my old workplace, I don't know who the hell this guy was. I'll call him Steve. But I always seem to end up having my lunch at the same time as him. It didn't matter what the events of the day were, or if I took my lunch at 11:30 or at 2. It seemed like Steve was always there in the break room at the same time I was. I began to think that Steve either didn't do any fucking work at all, or just hung out in the break room all the time, or that he had some strange obsession with me, that perhaps I had slighted him in some way and he was waging the ultimate war of passive-aggressive psychological attrition against me. Man, I started to hate Steve because I don't know what the fuck Steve ate every day, but it stank. Every time Steve was in the break room at the same time as me, he put his little Tupperware container in the microwave and hit the buttons. Beep, beep, beep. And it would make that noise, and then the light would come on, and there'd be that hum. And I knew that glass plate inside was slowly rotating, letting the ungodly odors of whatever fucking disgusting concoction Steve would soon devour seep out into the break room in a uniform manner, until it was totally permeated with noxious odor. It was like being in a fucking sauna of putridness. For this, I really hated Steve. And I wasn't the only one. Understandably, other people had the misfortune to experience the same thing I did. I started talking to other folks in the office and they knew exactly what I was on about. Who the fuck is that guy anyway? Tom from accounting. I know, right? Like, what the hell can smell that bad and possibly be something you would eat? Jenny from marketing. I don't know who the hell that guy is, but God, sometimes I can smell the break room from all the way down the hall and have to take my lunch at a different hour just because of whatever fucking disgusting mystery meat he's nuking in there. Jamie from IT. So you probably think this story's about Steve, right? That guy is the guy everyone hated and no one knew and was the one responsible for my old workplace shutting down? That he was just some dude from outside sneaking in and nuking human flesh he'd hacked up in the basement to devour in front of people for whatever sick and twisted reason it got off this closet psychopath? Well, you're wrong. Kinda. I found out later that Steve was a support guy from help desk, ordinary kid working his way through college that just really happened to like Thai food and fish. And it's true, as you can tell from my writing here, that no one really liked him because of his culinary preferences and their stench which we had to share in. You see, the person who everyone really hated, who was ultimately responsible for the end of my old workplace, was Diane. Fuck Diane. Some days I felt sorry for her, most other days I just wish she would die. Diane was fat. I'm talking really fat and a terrible dresser. Each day I had the misfortune of crossing paths with her, it was like a fun game to see what fucking style crime against humanity she committed. Lots of bright colors that should never go together. Lots of ugly baggy sweaters, neon leggings which would never be appropriate in an office environment anywhere in the world at any time. And God, her horrible perm dyed hair with the roots coming through. Fuck. Diane was loud. Her voice was low and grating, within it bitterness instilled from years of unhappy marriage and dealing with meaningless office bullshit and incompetent coworkers. I could hear her on the phone even though I was a whole block of cubicles away, bitching into her headset at some other drone who was, no doubt, only a few other cubicles away and hating his life because of her. No one liked Diane. Not even Diane. She got really upset some days. I heard her yell and scream and could fucking feel the awkwardness rising like warm air from my fellow drones' cubicles around me. You know when someone's voice changes when they are just on the very edge of breaking down into tears? Yeah, there was a lot of that too. Very awkward. It was pretty clear to everyone that knew who Diane was that she had emotional problems. Between Diane's all-out being a horrible fucking human being and Steve's nauseating microwavable specials, I was hating life more than just because I had to reboot my computer 4 times a day because it kept freezing and IT wouldn't fix it or give me a new one. I thought about quitting a lot, or about stabbing Steve or Diane with an ice pick. So yeah, Diane is the one everyone hated, and she's the one who was ultimately responsible for the company folding after what was unimaginatively dubbed the break room incident. Kind of an understatement. I think I was the only one who really put 2 and 2 together and realized that there was a previous altercation which really set off the break room incident, which I also happened to be around for. I don't think anyone else experienced the former and the latter, and I don't think anyone else had PTSD or can't sleep at night or has panic attacks and recurring nightmares like me, because they didn't see what I saw. Diane was often in the break room at the same time as Steve and I, which made things worse. On the plus side, she kept quiet while we sat there stewing in the disgusting vapors of whatever rancid disaster Steve was devouring. But I still had to be in the same room as her and listen to her drinking ridiculous amounts of soda from that fucking ginormous cup from 7-Eleven and eating whatever fucking box processed combination of salt, fat, and sugar which to her constituted food. Man, I made the mistake of looking up one time and could see the anger in her face. The pure frustration. Have you ever seen a very fat, very ugly woman in a bright yellow knitted sweater angrily chewing? I have, and it's horrible. And then one day, she went off. The precursor. Diane had already been in the break room when I arrived. Boxed food with 2,500 milligrams of sodium? Check. Fluorescent green cardigan? Check. Crow's feet and a dour expression and being a total bitch? Check. I sat as far as fucking possible away from her and tried to eat my meal with whatever tiny amount of peace I could muster in this hell of an environment that I called work. Then Steve came in. Steve came in with his headphones on, totally oblivious, and took the lid off the Tupperware container. Beep, 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 beep. And I felt like vomiting. Through my nearly gagging, I shot a cautious look over at Diane as she was sitting close to the microwave and Steve. Oh, shit. She started getting up. This was going to be bad. Hey, she said. Oh, this was going to be a fucking train wreck. I couldn't look away. Steve was still oblivious to Diane, not a foot away from him. Still plugged in, still rocking out to Megadeth or whatever the fuck he was listening to. Beep, 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 beep. He pushed the button and the door opened, and he took out the steaming container that smelled like shit. Hey! Diane said again. This time, he heard her. Slowly, he took out his headphones. That fucking stinks! Steve was, needless to say, a little surprised. That fucking stinks, she said again. And I swear to God, if you nuke any more of whatever disgusting crap you're about to eat when I'm in here, I will put your head in that goddamn microwave so you can smell it. Diane brought her big, flabby bear paw of a hand up and smacked the container Steve was holding up into his face. The hot, steamy, disgusting sludge, which he called food, exploded everywhere. All over him. Diane stormed out. Steve stood there in shock, reeking and coated in his brown, sludgy, foul-smelling lunch. I left and took the afternoon off. That night, I dreamt of Diane's demon eyes and sinking into an ocean of brown mire that was Steve's lunch. About a week later is when the incident happened. I came up to the break room for my lunch and I could smell the foul miasma floating down the hallway. Fucking Steve, I thought. As I got closer to the break room, I saw Diane leaving at the other end of the hall. I found out later I was the last person to see her before she disappeared. I got closer to the break room and the rancid smell got even worse. Jesus, Steve, what the fuck are you eating today? It smells like a fucking slaughterhouse in here. When I entered the break room, reality tilted. There was blood everywhere. The sink, the counter, the white paint on the drawers, they were all splattered with bright crimson. Steve's body sat on the floor in a pool of blood, leaned against one of the counter's cupboards. A giant knife sunk deep into the rib cage. The police report would later state that Diane had stabbed him over 43 times. The microwave hummed and rotated the plate inside, oblivious to the carnage of which it was a part. Diane said she put his head in the microwave, and that is exactly what she did. I have a new job now. I eat lunch at my desk, and I still can't fucking sleep.
I love that story so much. Like, I had the most fun narrating that story. It was really fun to do. It was the first time I did like a horror comedy type of thing on my channel, and it was a lot of fun. I remember bracing everybody for that too. Like, I was just like, hey guys, I'm doing something different. It's just to test it out, see what you guys think. So no, I'm really glad that everyone enjoyed it. All right, let's see here. Okay, next story up that's going to be read live is called Comus. And I will link you the story in chat. Please feel free to read with me as I read aloud. There's an image that I keep pushed away in the back of my mind. Occasionally it makes its way out and I can see that horrid face once more. My limbs go numb and I can feel my throat begin to tighten as every grotesque detail can be seen in my mind's eye. No matter how hard I try to suppress it, there's no way to fully forget pure evil. I raised my children by myself. My wife had passed away in a car accident. She'd been hit by a drunk driver running a red light. My daughter, Elizabeth, was 7 at the time, and my son, Nicholas, was only 4. To this day, the greatest challenge I faced in my life is having to tell them that their mother wasn't coming back. Even the day after the funeral, they walked around the house expecting her to jump out from behind a curtain like she was just playing hide and seek the whole time. Perhaps it was due to their young minds being unable to grasp the loss of their mother at the time, but I feel that they just didn't want to believe it. After I received her life insurance, I decided that we needed to move to a different part of our neighborhood. I wanted the children to still attend the same school and have the same friends, but I couldn't stand the bad memories I had in that house. Hardly a night went by when I didn't cry myself to sleep with my hand feeling the empty spot beside me. It took a few months, but we eventually adjusted. Sometimes when they were playing in the backyard, I would catch myself staring at my wife's portrait on the mantel above the fireplace. A smile would cross my face and I would feel a tear run down my cheek. At this point, I no longer cried from sadness, but from happiness. I'd finally accepted that she was in a better place and our lives were going to get better. All of that changed the day I saw it in the woods behind our house. When we switched houses, we moved into one of the edge of our neighborhood. It was in a cul-de-sac directly across from one of my children's friends. Not only was it a great social location for them, but I also desired a small bit of isolation for myself. I would still have my own companions over for a drink, but I did enjoy just sitting on my back porch watching the birds fly around the trees in the backyard. The trees went on for what seemed like an eternity, giving me a feeling that I was the ruler of an endless domain that started in my backyard. One day, while I was in my chair with a bottle of beer in my hand and a book in the other, I heard Elizabeth call from the edge of our lawn. When I asked her what she wanted, she turned to me with wide eyes and a trembling hand outstretched and pointing towards the woods. I strained my vision to try and find what she saw, but was unable to. I rested my book and drink down on a nearby table and walked across the grass to meet my daughter. I placed a hand on her shoulder and pulled her close and did my best to comfort her. "What has you so scared, darling? Is there a fox or something out there?" With her head still buried in my side, she shook it violently and continued to point. I followed her finger until I was staring at a large oak tree about 10 feet from the edge of our lawn. The leaves scattered among its branches had changed colors, and a few of them littered the ground around the trunk. Beneath the roots that sprawled across the dirt, I spotted a hole. I had noticed the tree before, but never expected that there would be an animal living underneath it. "Honey, I can't help if you don't tell me what's going on. Now, I'm going to ask you again. What is it that you saw?" Elizabeth took in a deep breath and spoke with fear grabbing at her vocal cords. "That." I looked up from her and stared at the base of the tree. A hand covered in flawed gray skin slowly reached out and clawed at the earth outside the hole. Long yellow fingernails scratched at the dirt until they dug deep into the damp soil. Now, with proper grip, I heard the creature let out a deep groan as it began to pull itself from the hole. As more of its limbs came into view, I took notice of how frail this thing appeared. I watched the thin muscles of its arms flex under its sickly skin to pull itself further out of the hole, revealing itself from the darkness underneath the tree. This unearthly creature lifted its head in the autumn sunlight, giving me the first glimpse of its face. It had sunken eyes and cheeks, causing the skin to be pulled tightly against its skull. Its bloodshot eyes would disappear from view as cracked eyelids slowly blinked. Greasy lumps of dark gray hair hung over the sides of its face and down the nape of its neck. The individual vertebrae of its spine pressed under its skin, shifting in a grotesque fashion as the body moved. I stood motionless in complete and utter shock. I could no longer hear the birds chirping or the wind in the leaves. The only noise I could hear was its thin and raspy breathing that croaked out of its throat. My daughter's hand had gripped my shirt and squeezed it tight. I could feel her shaking me as if she was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her. My ears soon filled with the piercing shriek that erupted from deep inside this creature as more of its body became exposed in the sunlight. As it continued to scream, the body shook violently and limbs moved unnaturally. To this day, I'm not sure what made me grab my daughter and run, but I'm thankful that something finally made me move. Before I knew it, I was inside and had slammed the door shut. I turned the deadbolt and threw the latch at the top of the door. As I kept my eyes trained at the edge of our lawn for it to crawl onto the grass, I yelled at Elizabeth to go grab my gun from the drawer in my nightstand. She left and soon returned with the weapon firmly grasped in her hand. I took it from her and quickly disengaged the safety. I cocked it and stood at the ready to unload every single bullet into this hellish monstrosity. As I stood guard, I instructed my daughter to call the police and tell them to send officers out here. 2 squad cars arrived in less than 10 minutes. It was no coincidence that I bought a house with close proximity to the police station. As I followed 2 officers towards the edge of the backyard, all 3 of us with our weapons drawn, another stayed inside with my daughter. Although, They approached the tree without much hesitation. I kept my distance, knowing what lurked inside that dark hole. With their weapons trained on the opening, one of them retrieved the flashlight from his belt and flashed it inside. What they found was nothing. They stuck their flashlight all the way inside until they could see every inch of that burrow. There was nothing inside of it. There wasn't a single trace of something ever being in there. The first thought that jumped to my mind was that they would think I was trying to stage some kind of hoax. However, they simply told me to keep an eye out for the creature again and to call them if I saw it. They also recommended that I keep a camera on me on the off chance that I could snap a picture of this thing. After comforting my daughter, they left us alone in my house. To this day, I'm convinced that they remembered my wife's death a few years prior and thought it best to not try claiming that I was running a prank on them. They probably figured that I had had enough trouble in my life and that there was no need to fake something like this. 4 years passed without me ever seeing any sign of it. Whenever it reared its ugly head again, it was in a way I had not even imagined. My daughter had just turned 11, and I permitted her to have some friends over for a sleepover. I took the trouble to push all the furniture in our living room down to one side and make a large room area for them to put their sleeping bags down. I told Elizabeth that I wanted them to sleep inside because there had been sightings of coyotes around the area, but she didn't seem to buy it. She knew the real reason why I didn't want them outside at night, and she didn't disagree with that one bit. While I spent the night with Nicholas in our media room watching a movie, I could occasionally hear the girls laughing or letting out a playful scream. I tried telling myself that the screams were only due to some stupid game, but my mind tried telling me that something else could be the source. After the movie ended, I carried my boy upstairs and tucked him into bed. Afterwards, I peered from the railing of the stairs at the girls asleep on the living room floor. They had arranged themselves such that they were around a toy lantern with sleep pulling at my eyes. I retreated to my room and fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I was awoken by the sound of glass hitting the floor and my Elizabeth screaming. Instinctively, I grabbed the gun from the drawer of my nightstand and ran down the stairs. As I bolted into the living room, I noticed empty sleeping bags scattered around the floor. It didn't take me long to find the girls clustered into one corner of the room with a lantern shared amongst them. The sickly yellow light emitted by the cheap bulb illuminated the fear on their faces. "Elizabeth, what the hell happened down here?" I asked as I stared at the broken window. Whatever had broken it had done so from outside. I was met with only the sound of crickets chirping in the night air. I turned to the girls in the corner and found them all pointing out the window. It was at that moment that an overwhelming sense of dread filled my body. I felt the urge to vomit as my mind raced to the only conclusion. It had come back. I bolted to the back door and threw it open. As I ran out into the backyard, I yelled to the girls to call the police. My bare feet slammed onto the ground as I sprinted full force towards the forest at the edge of our lawn. By the time I reached the edge, the ankles of my sweatpants were soaked with dew. Cupping my hands around my mouth, I hollered my daughter's name. The only response I received was my pain-stricken voice echoing back at me. I took in a deep breath and prepared to call for her once more when I stopped. Crawling under a bush just a few feet away, I saw its face for the first time in years. In the milky glow of the moonlight, it slowly clawed at the ground and pulled itself out from under the bush. With each small movement of its appendages, I could hear the cracking of joints and dry leaves scratching against its leathery skin. This thing had taken my daughter, and I wanted nothing more than to grab it by the neck, strangle it, and slowly feel the life leave its body. The only problem was that I couldn't. As much as I wanted to, I found myself unable to move. Compared to the burning hatred I had for this creature, my fear towered over that and kept my movement at bay. Slowly, its mouth opened to reveal pointed, stained teeth. It let out a heavy breath, causing the air around me to suddenly be filled with the horrid stench of rot and decay. As I pulled my shirt over my nose, it began to make a noise. It started out as a guttural rumble from deep within the creature. Soon enough, it escaped into the air as a deep croak. This progressively became louder as the noise underwent a grotesque transformation into an ear-piercing shriek. I could feel my eardrums screaming for relief, causing me to throw my hands over my ears. This did little good as the noise still managed to find its way into my head. When the noise finally stopped, I lowered my hands and opened my eyes. It was gone. There was no trace that it had ever been there. The ground underneath the bush showed no signs of anything ever being there. I found myself unable to look away from that spot. I'm unsure how long I stood there. It took 3 police officers to shake me back to reality. When I was finally able to break my gaze from that bush, I screamed. I fell to my knees and erupted into a fit of hot tears and screams. I pounded at the ground and grabbed the grass. I expected the officers to try and bring me back to my feet, but they let me continue. It was nearly a week before they found her body. She was almost a mile from the house, deep in the woods. Although I could not bring myself to go out there to view the crime scene, I was given a description of the area later that day. They found her under a thin layer of dried leaves, with her torn and stained clothes tossed around. She had been violated. My little girl, my little 11-year-old girl had been raped and tortured by whatever the hell this thing was. It took her innocence, her purity, her very existence. The funeral was one of the hardest days of my life. While everyone else cried in the cold November rain, I stood silent and unmoving while staring at the small coffin. All the despair I felt had left my body with the tears I cried for days on end. No matter how much I wanted to cry, I couldn't bring myself to do so. My tear ducts, like my heart and soul, were empty. I'll still visit her gravesite on her birthday. Other than that, I can't bring myself to look at her name engraved in that stone. There are no pictures of her anywhere in my home. The sight of her face brings me to my knees and leaves my eyes red with hot tears. I still have pictures of my wife, but this is different. When the drunk driver who killed her was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, I had felt closure. Elizabeth is different. That creature is still out there. The thing that killed my daughter and violated her is still prowling somewhere in those woods. Elizabeth's pictures are neatly packed in a box upstairs. Until the day I find that thing, I can't stand to look at her face. I feel that I let her down by not attacking it that night. My fear got the better of me, and it still haunts me to this day. It's not a guarantee that I would have been able to stop this thing, but at least I would have done the best I could. Nicholas has grown up. He went to college and got a degree in mechanical engineering. Soon afterwards, he found a girlfriend and eventually got married to her. They had a child a few years later. To this day, I don't let my granddaughter, Elizabeth, come to visit. I fear that it will rear its ugly head once more if it knows she's here. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I think I hear something in the woods. It's always faint, and almost to the point that I think my mind is playing tricks on me. However, I'll listen closely and make out the words that the creature is uttering with its deep, raspy voice. Comus rape, Comus break, sweet young virgins virtue take, naked flesh, flowing hair, her terror screams, they cut the air, but no one hears her there. Oh, that story took a dark turn. Hey, Vidith, by the way. Hello. Welcome. I wasn't expecting it to go that route. That was kind of weird. Not a fan. I mean, I am a fan, but at the same time, it's like, what the fuck? Let's see if I can grab another short one. Are you guys ready? Oh my gosh. All right, here we go.
So, you heard of that thing called the Torso Ghost?
Gary lulled his head over the back of the couch, half-empty beer bottle in hand, while Renee sat on the floor and fiddled with her digital camera. It was a typical Friday night. None of us had much of anything to do, so cheap beer and campy horror movies were the order of the evening. By midnight, we'd all be half drunk and scaring each other silly with whatever weird story we could think up or pull from the internet. I shook my head. No. Is that a new one?
Sort of.
Gary replied.
I found it on that Urban Legends website last week. Actually has to do with that old warehouse past the docks. You know, the one that used to make bombs and stuff?
We did know that place. Everyone did. It was a hotbed of local rumor and paranormal tales. There had been a number of accidents there during the building's tenure as a munitions factory, and a plaque bearing the names of a few dozen workers still adorned the outside wall near the door. Naturally, that amount of pain and death in one place would produce a bumper crop of ghost stories, whether anything was actually going on or not. Renee put down her camera as Gary went on.
Well, see, there were lots of workers that got maimed and stuff, right? Because of the machinery. And this one guy, he was walking by one of the big ones. He got pulled in and ripped to pieces before anyone could help him. When they finally got the thing stopped, the only thing they pulled out was his torso. His arms and legs had been crushed and torn to bits, and his head was squished like a pumpkin.
He gave a morbid grin.
They probably had to hose blood and brains out of the gears for weeks.
Ew! Renee thumped his leg and made a face. Dude, that's gross!
Oh, it gets better.
Gary insisted, grinning even wider to spite her.
They buried the guy, just his torso, because they couldn't find enough of his limbs or his head to put in the coffin. They say he still haunts the factory.
What? With the other 30 or so dead workers? I broke in. Doesn't it get a little crowded?
He probably doesn't take up much space. See, it's only his torso that people see.
Just a torso? Renee's tone carried a distinct scoff. How does that even work? Does he float around or just sort of flop across the floor or what?
Neither. He just sort of turns up, propped in the corners of rooms.
Gary took a swig of his beer.
People see him for a second in flashlight beams or camera flashes.
Well, that doesn't sound very scary, I said. Gross, sure, but...
It's scary enough if you happen to take a picture of him by accident.
Gary shot back.
See, he's angry about the way he died. And even angrier that the factory didn't bother to try to find the rest of him before he was buried. He wants his limbs back. So they say.
He lowered his voice to a theatrical Vincent Price whisper.
They say he steals limbs from the living. If you take his picture, he'll come find you and rip off bits of you to make himself complete again.
That sounds like a load of crap. Renee stood and went to get a beer of her own. Good for scaring the kiddies, though.
We could go and find out, you know. It's not that far from here. We could drive over in like half an hour and see for ourselves.
What, are you nuts?
No, seriously.
Gary bounded up and leaned over the back of the sofa.
Let's do it. Bring your camera, and I'll drive, and we'll go check it out tonight.
So, that was how the three of us wound up in a car, questionably sober, and heading for a crumbling old warehouse on the waterfront. Renee and I weren't totally on board, but Gary was jazzed enough for all three of us. The place was dark when we pulled up and completely silent except for the distant sound of waves on pylons.
All right,
Gary crowed.
let's go hunt us a ghost.
He vaulted out of the car. Renee shot me a, "Can you believe this idiot?" look, and we followed him. We pulled ourselves up on an open loading dock and went inside. As expected, it was pitch black. Gary and I clicked on the flashlights we'd brought with us, and Renee clicked on her camera. "All right, genius," she said in tones of barely restrained sarcasm. "Now what?"
You're the photographer. You tell me.
Gary shot back. "How about a group shot to test the camera?" I suggested, just to keep them from bickering. This seemed to do the trick. Renee set the camera on a barrel by the door and set the timer. We posed against a wall of corrugated metal, Charlie's Angels style, like a bunch of dorks. The flash blinded us all for a second. While we stood there, blinking the spots out of our eyes, something clanked in the darkness.
Dude, already?
Gary flashed his light into the open doorway behind us.
That was quick.
I tried to tell him not to get excited, that it might have just been a chain moving in the wind or a piece of rusted out equipment shifting, but Gary wasn't listening. He ran off into the darkness before either of us could stop him. "Oh, hell," Renee muttered. We ran after him, but the factory floor was a maze of chain-link partitions and hulking hunks of metal that were once state-of-the-art machinery. Gary didn't respond to our calls of his name. We looked for the flickering beam of his flashlight, but no luck there either. "Gary, where the hell are you?" I yelled. "Shh!" Renee hissed, her nails suddenly dug into my arm. "Do you hear that?" I paused, listening. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then there was a slow, soft scraping sound somewhere nearby. Something was sliding across the cement floor, scratching and grating softly as it went. My blood froze in my veins. The image of the dead man's mangled torso flashed into my head, a bloody, headless thing dragging itself across the floor by the stumps of bone protruding from its severed limbs. The sound came nearer, inch by inch. With every scrape, my heart gave a painful jerk against my ribs, and Renee's nails sank deeper into the sleeve of my jacket. It was only a few feet away now. Renee shrieked, and I brought my flashlight up, futilely thinking it might be a weapon.
Holy balls, that's bright.
Gary threw up his hands to block the glare. Renee punched him. "You asshole! The hell were you doing running off like that?"
I found something. Come on.
Without waiting for an answer, he took off again. What could we do but follow him? Fortunately, this time he stayed in range of my flashlight, and we found ourselves standing in front of a particularly large and decrepit-looking piece of machinery that sported a giant wheel on one side.
This is it.
Gary told us with a triumphant spread of his arms, as if this were an art exhibition and he'd just unveiled his masterpiece. This is what? Renee and I said, almost in unison.
Oh, come on. Look.
He pointed to some odd brown stains on the metal grating beneath his feet.
Those have to be blood stains. I bet this is the machine that...
We froze, staring. The wheel had just moved. It was the barest inch of a turn, but the damn thing had moved! Another couple of inches. Something clunked ominously, and with a tortured screech of old metal, the wheel began to turn. "Gary?" Renee said in a terrified whisper. "Gary, get away from there!"
No way. This is what we came to see. Come on, take a picture. Let's see if we can catch the ghost.
Gary's grin was practically maniacal as he stood beside the slow awakening machine. It was at the exact moment when I decided I'd had just about enough and was stepping forward to put an end to things by dragging his fool ass out of there if I had to, that everything went straight to hell. Gary's foot slipped on the grating. Before Renee or I could reach him, both his legs had been pulled under the wheel. The scream that echoed off those walls was one I don't think I'll ever be able to get out of my head. It went on and on, hoarse and ugly, underlaid by a wet, crunching sound as the wheel gained momentum and the rusted metal turned dark and wet. With a sickening lurch, we managed to pull Gary out of the gears, but it was too late. His legs were mangled stumps, pumping crimson puddles onto the floor, and his skin was already turning waxy. His pupils fixed and unresponsive. Oh shit, I heard myself say. Oh shit. We gotta get out of here. Renee's voice shook. We gotta get help. A clank from the machine was all it took to send us running. Through the labyrinth of the factory floor, back toward the entrance, we practically flew, barely seeing our way by the beam of the flashlight. The open bay was a patch of lighter darkness, and we aimed for it at full speed. I practically dove off the loading dock, landing hard on the asphalt and turning back to help Renee down. I started digging for my cell phone to call. I don't know, an ambulance would have been pretty pointless, and we were trespassing, so the cops were out of the question. Suddenly, Renee turned back. Shit, I left my camera. Renee, wait! She ran back to the loading dock and tried to haul herself up on it. I heard a snap and a screech of metal. I could only watch in horror as the bay door came crashing down. Renee's scream split the night like a siren, and she staggered back, both arms neatly severed just above the elbow. Red gore painted streaks down the lip of the loading dock. Right about then is when everything went black. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. The cops badgered me about our reasons for being there, took my statement about the ghost story, the machine that moved on its own, and what had happened to Gary and Renee. They told me Gary never made it out of the factory. He'd lost too much blood and he'd breathed his last right there on the metal grating where we'd left him. Renee was still in a coma. Doctors weren't optimistic about her chances due to the trauma inflicted by the falling bay door, but in the end, she pulled through. After the investigation wrapped up and I finally got out of the intensive care, they gave me Renee's camera. Somehow, it had remained intact and undisturbed on that barrel just inside the door. I borrowed a laptop and flicked through the photos on the memory card. I don't know what I was looking for. I think I just wanted to see their faces again, you know? Wanted to try and overwrite the awful images etched on the inside of my skull. There were only a dozen or so, but it helped. Pictures of the three of us drinking beer, making goofy faces, grinning like idiots. I felt a lump rising in my throat. Gary had been kind of a dumbass sometimes, but we'd been friends since grade school, and I was going to miss him terribly. I looked at a picture of Renee balancing a bottle on one finger and tried to wrap my brain around the idea that she'd never be able to drink on her own again without help or a prosthetic. The very last picture was the one we'd taken upon entering the factory. I almost didn't want to look at it. Didn't want to see those last moments we'd spent together before. It took half an hour of hovering over the next button before I finally summoned up the strength to click. There we were, in what was probably the worst Charlie's Angels trio pose ever. I laughed in spite of myself and felt my eyes prickle with tears. The upward angle of flash had reflected strangely on the corrugated metal, making our shadows loom above us like harbingers of doom. Then I saw it. In the very edge of the photo was a skinny black rectangle that marked the doorway Gary had run through. I could only see half of it, but that was enough. In the very bottom of the doorway was a pale, mangled-looking lump. I somehow knew what it was before I fully processed exactly what I was looking at. It was a limbless human torso. We'd been feet away from the thing when the flash went off. Gary was closest, Renee was in the middle, and then me. As I stared at the photo, trying to find some other explanation, trying to think of anything that didn't involve vengeful limb-ripping ghosts, I noticed something else. Our shadows weren't just distorted, they were incomplete. Gary had lost his legs. Gary's shadow had no legs. Renee had lost her arms, and Renee's shadow had no arms. And now I'm terrified to leave this hospital. Terrified to go anywhere outside of my room. Terrified of what's waiting for me out there. Because in the photo, my shadow had no head.
Yo. I love the video. Like, you know, sometimes when I go back and listen to this stuff, I'm just like, did I really do that? It's kind of mind-blowing to me. Night, 2 geeky gamers. Thanks for stopping by. All right, we got one more left. And then I'm going to call it a night. It's called Deep. It's a long one. So I hope you guys are ready. Okay. I will post a link to the story. Hey, Queenie. Link to the story, and you can follow along as I read aloud. So. All right, here we go. Blake Gardner awoke to an oppressive physical darkness. It embraced him. As the cold shadows flowed around him, he felt himself falling, slowly but surely. He tried to reach out, to flail and to grasp, but only pain greeted him. Something bit into his wrists like fiery needles. His hands found each other fast, and they clasped together with interlocked fingers. They had been bound from behind his back. When he tried his feet, not only did he find the same intrusion of pain, but there was a weight there, a tension that dangled below his legs that dragged him along. As were his hands, so had his legs been bound, and something was pulling him deeper, farther into the dark. After a few seconds, a pressure came upon him. He felt it around his eyes and deep in his sinuses. The shadows had become overwhelming and heavy, aggressive. The further along he went, the greater the weight of the blackness. Every time he moved, he heard the darkness move too. It was a physical presence. He felt himself push through it. It felt familiar, very familiar. He felt something in his mouth, plastic and malleable. He breathed through it, and a stagnant air filled his lungs. When he released it, he felt the air move out the sides of his mouth. It was then he had the sudden, sinking realization. His predicament finally made horrible sense. The air was released from the sides of his mouth, and it formed bubbles that fizzed in the darkness around him. He heard them and felt them against his face as they floated away. Some of the pressure left his face. The air that escaped paved the way to his terrible understanding. Some of the darkness seeped in through the corners of his mouth. Its salty, gritty texture filled his dried mouth. The taste reaffirmed his worst nightmare. No, he thought. No. This cannot be. No. He tried to scream just moments before he reached his silt-covered destination. No one would hear him, for he was alone. Alone, bound, and trapped on the ocean floor. The panic that beset him was unlike any he'd ever known before, and again he started fighting his restraints. A useless gesture. He tossed and turned like a fish at the end of a long line. He stood no chance of escaping. The ropes that bound him were far too tight and thick for that. After several minutes, Blake felt a terrible exhaustion set in. The water chilled him. The only warmth came from the falling adrenaline surging within his shivering veins. The salt stung at his chest with needles and pins, a shocking and unwelcome pain. He stared into the dark. He was mortified by the almost perfect darkness before him. In the night and at its depth, he was positive his visibility was no more than a few inches in front of his face. Yet he knew he could see. His eyes and nose, for that matter, were both dry. They were covered. Someone had given him a mask to see through. But why? He could see nothing. Nothing. And beyond that nothing, the shadows swirled thick and devious, concealing everything from the smallest plankton to the largest predator. His breathing accelerated as his mind kindly illuminated the shadows beyond. He saw sharks, hundreds of them circling, their eyes as black as the water, their teeth shining in a bloody white radiance. They all smiled at him. They'd been given such a lovely present. That was what he was, wasn't it? A gift to anything and everything that lurked below. The only thing he was missing was a pretty little bow. And he'd be alive to feel it. Whoever had damned him here made sure of that. What cruel bastard sent a man to the deep while he's asleep? What had happened? His memory was a jigsaw shoved onto the floor, scattered and unorganized. His mind tried to repair it, but the pieces wouldn't fit. In his current state, the reconstruction of said puzzle looked incredibly unlikely. There was something about a party, a bar. A current ran across the small of his naked back like a giant centipede. Imaginary or not, Blake turned, twisting his bonds, but the image before him remained the same. If anything had been there, he'd never have known. As he rolled to his left and then back to his right, nothing changed. The static image of nothingness held his focus tight like a vice. It continued to do so until he looked up. The appearance of some light, any light at all, should have helped alleviate his fears, but instead it felt as though his heart had shriveled up and died within his chest. The moon watched him from overhead, too far away to offer any help. Its light was dulled and blurred by the surface, a surface which must have sat at least 70 feet away. A swimmable distance, a good distance for any diver who wasn't bound to the bottom of the sea. It could be worse, his mind decided to say, yet the temptation of the waves above and the soothing light of the moon offered him no hope. They merely mocked him with a release he couldn't have. Before his eyes, the moon was swallowed by the dark. Blake grasped fast for the rope below, holding it tight. He pulled and thrashed until his back was brought to bear against the hard concrete block that had sunk him. His heart raced as his eyes strained in suffocating black. Something, somewhere above, had just crossed between him and the only light he had left. Something big, and he could not see it. He could only wait for it to take him. Seconds passed, and the moon hadn't turned. Minutes passed and he was still alive. His grip relaxed, cautious. He was very cautious. He felt himself rise, held buoyant by the breath in his lungs. In the depths, it wasn't just his eyes that failed him. All his senses had seemingly abandoned him to his fate. His hearing was useless. The ones who had damned him to the deep had placed earplugs in his ears, and though they'd surely saved his eardrums from rupturing under the water pressure, the only sounds that came through them were harsh and static. All the ocean offered him was a droning white noise. Down there in the deep, the only sense he had, unhampered, was his touch. But that could only help him so much. He was a prisoner in an unaccessible hill. It took about 5 minutes, an unspeakable amount of time for Blake before light would reappear in the waters above. In that time, Blake, fueled by his fear of the suffocating unknown, had been feeling around his restraints. He reaffirmed what he already knew. Rope had bound him at the wrists and at his ankles. He followed the line beneath his ankles and felt about the cinder block that had pulled him down. The rope wrapped around it many times. Each strand was as thick as his thumb, and he couldn't find any knot. It was surely on the other side of the block, suffocated in the thick muck below. He couldn't untie it. The idea of his pocket knife came to mind. He should have had it on him. He never went anywhere without it. It was a good, hopeful idea for a few seconds. When he reached upwards for his shorts, he was met with only the touch of his own skin. His chin came to his chest as if he could see himself. His chin rubbed against his raw collarbone, and Blake found he was also without a shirt. He was naked. Completely exposed and naked. They'd stripped him of not only his freedom and his understanding, but of his goddamn clothes as well. His knife surely sat comfortably with his clothes far away from him above the surface. He cursed in an explosion of air and fury that had taken over from the bone-numbing fear he'd felt moments before. It was a feeling that any man who had hope torn from his chest so quickly after finding it known all too well. In the darkness, however, it was a fleeting feeling. The cold that crept along his skin made itself known once more. It begged for Blake's attention. Where was he before? His mind wandered back to the jigsaw puzzle, and it found some of the pieces unturned. A bar. Downtown LA. That was it. His last memories of freedom, and they were spent in a drunken haze. Just a typical Friday night. Not exactly respectable, but not worth his situation, surely. What could he have done to elicit this fate? An alley. He flipped a jigsaw piece in his head. There had been a woman there. She'd called to him. Beautiful woman. Blonde, green eyes. What happened then? Another piece flipped. She wasn't alone, was she? Another piece. She'd offered him a drink earlier. Something was in it. The puzzle turning stopped. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, something above caught his eye. As if granted by a cruel god, a green light descended from the surface. It caught his eye early, and he followed it as it sunk beside him. It fell gracefully, almost perfectly, through the water. In a slow drop, it settled nicely in the silt below. Blake saw pieces of the sediment rise around the light in a thin cloud as the dim LED glow stick touched the ocean floor. His only company, the light had landed just beyond his grasp. He tried, of course, but he found the weight that tethered him to the bottom was too great to move. So the light remained nearby, but unusable. He tried to hover close to its glow. It showed him the smooth silt at the bottom for the first time. The vaguest silhouette of his face mask had appeared around his sight, and when he looked down, he could see the outline of his chest. More importantly, he could see that in the yard or so between him and the light, he was perfectly alone. He smiled, until he realized the light in front of him had somehow increased the eeriness of the wall of black behind him. He could feel it sticking to his skin like a giant spider's web. Its caress was unwelcome. He thrashed around, struggling to pull the block closer to the light, but he accomplished nothing. More motion attracted his gaze from above. There were more glow sticks, 3 more descended from the surface. He saw 2 of them enter the water from above near where the moon had been. They illuminated the faintest shape of the object that sat above his head. A boat. Was it help? Were the lights there to pave way for a dive team? The idea was sweet as it rolled in his head, but it seemed so unlikely. The stinging on his chest brought the pessimist back to the surface. It was his captors above. They were dropping the lights to be cruel, nothing more. As they settled, he noticed that the pattern hadn't been random. The lights all landed around him in a perfect semicircular formation. He noticed each one had fishing line wrapped around their middle. They hadn't sunk. They'd been lowered. But why? The prickling feeling on his chest got worse. The light around him had grown helpful. Blake could see himself, for the most part, in their sickly green glow. It was both reassuring and disheartening to see the seafloor around him. He was thankful to see the silt free of crabs or other aquatic nightmares. The idea of something crawling up the ropes and onto him made him shiver. However, to see that only algae spot at the bottom was crushing. There was nothing. No seashell, no shark tooth, nothing that Blake could have possibly used to cut himself free. His head dropped in frustration. There was something on his chest. No, not on. Something was in his chest, cut into. Something had cut all over his chest, and the cuts were purposeful in their direction and design. They cut shapes, symbols into his chest. Blake had spent his whole life in LA, a city boy through and through, but he knew a brand when he saw one. He had been branded. To Blake, it felt more than a physical injury. It was a violation upon him, a desecration. His gut churned and his fingernails bit into the palms of his hands with a furious persistence. Another glow stick fell from the surface. The glow stick, the final light, fell opposite of the semicircle formation behind him. Its light was unguided. As it sank, it twirled at the water's mercy. It fell until it was just above him. It fell until it was almost an arm's reach away from his face. It fell towards his feet. Then, Blake watched as it sank past the ocean floor. It was with horror that Blake followed the light's descent. He merely had to lean forward to watch as the light carved its way farther and farther into the darkness. He watched, eyes wide, as the light slipped so far into darkness it had become a memory. Faded and dull. As it sank, it had revealed to Blake everything. It had shown him the solid wall of sand and rock it had passed as it sunk, the same wall Blake sat atop of. It showed him a depth without end. The light had shown Blake that he was only mere feet away from an oceanic drop-off. The trench before him was hidden once more in shadows so perfectly that Blake started to wonder if he'd hallucinated it. His heart knew he hadn't. He'd been dropped perfectly at the edge of a certain death, and the light was his captors intentionally showing him. From the surface, they played a cruel game with Blake. A tear caught at the bottom of his face mask. He wasn't sure if missing the trench had been a blessing or a curse. If he'd gone over, if it was half as deep as he thought, then the pressure would surely kill him. If not, then the sudden descent would have played havoc with his blood. Blake wasn't a seafaring man, but he wasn't a moron. He knew what the pressures of the deep ocean could do, and the creatures that lived down there were far more frightening than any shark. The thought of it, of one of those creatures rising, made him recoil further. His back came to rest against the slime of the ocean floor. He lay in the comfortable circle of light. Up here, at the edge of oblivion, he was condemned to wait. Death could come at any time, Blake was sure of that. That was the worst of it. The waiting. Blake considered, if only for a moment, pushing himself over the edge. He would die, painfully, but it would be faster. It would also be on his own terms. The idea of control gave him some satisfaction. But how would he move the weight? Last he tried, it had been impossible, and who was to say the depth was far enough to kill him? What if he landed at the perfect place between agony and death? It was too risky. He could have chosen to stop breathing. No, he could have made it even easier than that. He could have just spit out his regulator. That would have been more peaceful, less painful. Either way, Blake decided it was far preferable to die as he wanted than to die as the bastards above him wanted him to. He just needed to gather the courage. Courage, well, ran in short supply as the lost light began to emerge from the dark. Blake had risen to a floating position again when, in his peripherals, he saw the faint glimmer beyond the edge of the trench. He avoided it. Surely it wasn't real. It was his mind, his panic. If he ignored it, he'd suffer no consequence. Yet the light persisted, and soon the glow became unmistakable. The shimmer called to Blake from just past the edge, in the deep. Blake looked. The light was rising. Against all logic and sanity, the lost light had begun to ascend in the frigid waters. It showed Blake something awful. Below its light, the shadowed waters seemed to breathe and stir. In the periphery of the rising green light, shades changed as something rose from the depths. It was a sickening realization that came when he saw the shadows had wrapped themselves about the middle of the glow stick. The light was rising because something was carrying it. Blake's view was again obscured by bubbles and darkness as he retreated from the abyssal edge. In quick, pathetic motions, he tried to pull himself away from the rising terror. He felt the prickly sand pressing up against his back as he wrestled futilely with his restraints. Unfortunately, he had neither the strength nor the energy to break the vacuous hold the sediment had upon the block. He could do little more than yell through his regulator as the light peaked. Blake could see it now. As the light stopped its vertical ascent, a disturbing scene greeted him. He would have given anything to return to the darkness as a figure clambered up and over the ledge. It stood directly before him on two naked legs. Their eyes met. The sight before him was unimaginable. The light had been carried up by a man. No, not a man. A corpse. The light showed enough to confirm that. The man's bare skin had grown ragged and gray, waterlogged by untold months beneath the waves. Some sections of flesh had long since given way, surrendered to the sea, revealing the fetid muscles beneath. Blake gagged when he noticed the tiny tendrils of tattered skin dangled off into the distance. Sights upon the man's body where the denizens of the ocean had begun to pick him apart and eat, piece by piece. Rigor mortis had a tight grip upon the man's pained, tortured face. His eyes were as wide like his mouth, frozen in an eternal, silent scream. He'd been dead for a long time, yet his eyes still moved. They fixed themselves upon Blake. The monstrous vision held the light close to its face, and Blake couldn't help himself. He stared deeply into those clouded gray eyes. Blake could see the thought behind its gaze. A soul sat within it. The corpse leaning closer, brought by an unseen current perhaps towards Blake. Extending its free arm in a rigid, almost robotic fashion, it began to examine him. It seemed inquisitive, like a man examining vegetables at a supermarket. It was morbid in the way it moved. When in motion, the limbs and muscles of the figure seemed healthy, alive. Yet every time the motion stopped, the body resumed a state of incredible rigidity, caught in a constant state of flux. The man who appeared both living and dead. Blake, petrified before this horror, saw as the corpse's eyes left his and fell upon his chest. Lowering its light, its other hand came forward, and its waterlogged fingers began to trace the patterns carved into Blake's chest as if it were following the streets on a lamp. Revolted at the creature's touch, Blake squirmed and twitched, but the corpse held no contempt. It followed its every motion with intense precision. Seemingly satisfied, it lifted itself back. No, it was pulled back. There was something behind the corpse. Like a pillar in the night, a shape had taken form behind the moving carcass. It rose out of sight above and below, and with every swaying motion the corpse made in the water, the pillar followed like an enormous shadow. The corpse danced at the pillar's will, a puppet to the puppeteer. Before he could grant it any further thought, his attention was called back to the corpse as it had brought the glow stick towards its own chest. It became deadly still in the water. It was waiting for Blake to see. It had to show him. The corpse showed Blake his chest and the familiar brand upon it. Blake was staring at the very same symbols that had been cut into his own chest. It wasn't an execution or some random cruel murder. He hadn't pissed off the wrong people. Nope. It was far worse and far more primal than that. It was a sacrifice, and Blake was the lamb. As Blake's eyes stretched wide, the corpse dropped the glow stick and it rose towards the surface. The pillar carried the figure into the shadows above. At that moment, Blake made the decision that whatever was to happen next was the worst case scenario. Everything else was preferable. He wouldn't be the lamb. He tried to spit out his regulator. Disgusting salty water managed to creep into his mouth as he struggled, but even though his teeth and lips were parted from it, the regulator wouldn't fall from his mouth. Using his tongue, he tried to push it out, but it held fast to his face. He felt the pull of the regulator around his lips and on the back of his head. The bastards hadn't given him a choice. They'd taped the regulator to his face. He had to be alive for what came next. Through the murk, another corpse appeared. The pillar had brought up another degraded carcass from fathoms below. Blake floundered against the seafloor as the woman inched closer. She was younger than the man who'd come before, and her body showed fewer signs of decay behind her. Behind her eyes, however, sat the same cold intelligence. That sentience watched him as she rose away into the dark. Behind her eyes, however, sat the same cold intelligence. The sentience watched him as she rose away into the dark, her visage fleeting. Blake saw that across her bare chest were etched the same symbols. Symbols of the damned. Another corpse came. This one was horribly disfigured and mangled. There was more rot than man left on his bones, yet the eyes remained lively. His jaw dangled by only strands of sinew, and his right arm had long since been torn asunder at the elbow. The white of the bone seemed to glimmer in the dull light, despite the rot. The edges of the symbols were still visible on his white chest, and his left hand managed to hold on threateningly to an old, rusted dagger. Like the others, the rotted man faded into the above. More bodies appeared as the endless pillar rose. They came one after the other. Each one bore a look of indescribable anguish and pain on their face, a look that they forever carried, enslaved by the alien pillar behind them. Around Blake, a storm of currents had begun to churn the sediment into a frenzy. What little light he had soon started to dirty as a swirling cloud threatened to drown it all out. The currents came from beyond the light. Things moved unseen out there in the dark. They started to touch him. Like lightning, arms and hands long gone cold reached for him. Whenever his back was turned, they'd project themselves from the darkness like a sunken jack-in-the-box. He'd feel their slime-covered fingers caress him. Their nails would jab and scratch him. And each and every time Blake turned around, he would see just enough. An arm sucked back into the void beyond his gaze. The cat toying with the mouse. A mouse with its back crushed in a trap. That was when she entered into the light, a horrid witch of a woman. Her skin had withered and she seemed more bone now than flesh. The symbol on her chest had fallen away and only the scars on her rib cage remained. Her sunken eyes glared harshly as she reached for his face. Blake screamed for help that would never come as the woman ensnared him in her decomposing fingers. She brought him in close, hugging him tightly as if they'd been friends, with muscles Blake didn't even think she had. He could feel a touch on his neck as she exhaled water from her lungs. Up close, Blake saw every horrible detail. The pillar was clear now, and it was obvious that it was alive. It was the dull, rotted color of the corpses, and it had the obvious texture of meat. From the woman flowed the strings of the puppeteer. Veins and tentacles that had long ago forcibly invaded her body fed directly into the enormous mass behind her. In the dimming light, Blake swore he saw them pulsate. They were pumping like the veins beneath his skin. He felt another liquid breath on his neck. Craning around, he saw that what he believed to be a pillar had wrapped around behind him. The first man he'd seen had emerged, and the pillar carried him away. The mass of flesh that had fused to his back lifted his body upwards towards the surface. His eyes never left Blake. In the shadows, the pillar seemed to squirm and twist as it snaked its way up, thickening the further it went. As it positioned itself, Blake understood what it was that had risen from the trench. The pillar was actually an enormous tentacle. Like the suckers of an octopus, the tentacle had used the woman's arms to hold Blake tight. Behind him, the tentacle had brought into position the ghastly, one-armed man Blake had seen earlier. The woman tightened her grip as she presented Blake to the one-armed man. Craning his neck, Blake saw the man fumble with the rusted dagger. He brought it sharply towards the bonds that held Blake's ankles so tight, and he began to cut. He was reckless, imprecise, and he sawed through the ropes. As the binds came loose, Blake grimaced as the knife continued to saw. The man had accidentally severed a slice of skin from the side of Blake's ankle. Blake felt his legs come apart from each other, and he let them spread into the water. He was free from the bottom. Free. In that instant, the fight started. He let loose with the fury and panic that the entire ordeal had granted him, but the corpse held tight. In fact, the more he struggled, the tighter her grasp got. The strength was far too great to resist, and soon Blake started to feel his ribs bend and strain. He couldn't breathe, but he kept fighting. The whole time Blake fought, he saw her horrid gaze, unblinking, unfeeling, unyielding. Despite his thrashing, the puppet corpse behind him decided to proceed with the cutting. This time it took aim at the bonds between Blake's wrists. As he did so, Blake had an idea, a risky, terrible idea. In acceptance of the fact, his legs stopped kicking. The woman released her grip just enough, in kind, and Blake sucked in a huge breath of air. His eyes glared defiantly at the specter. He kept breathing, waiting. He had nothing to lose as he made his move. As soon as the dead man had finished cutting his binds, and at the precise moment the final strand had parted, Blake's palms closed around the rusted blade. They didn't let go. He wanted to scream as the blade dug into his palm, but he was beyond that now. His veins burned with pure determination. The one-armed man seemed not to possess the same strength as the woman had, for his grip on the knife was weak and feeble. No matter how hard the man behind him pulled, Blake would not release the blade. The woman's face never changed, but Blake saw a hatred grow in her eyes. With a terrible yank that nearly ripped the meat from his palm and bloodied the water all around him, Blake pulled the knife and the rest of the man's fingers free. Behind him, the top of the tentacle ran into the dark, carrying corpses along like a morbid roller coaster, but in front of him, the woman didn't retreat. She tightened her vice-like grip. Unfortunately for her, the grip was too high, and she found the tank on his back. This provided Blake with ample room to bring his right hand forward and to plunge the blade deep into the woman's stomach. It scraped through her spine. Her grip failed, just long enough, and Blake pushed himself free. Blake decided he wasn't going to die. The woman tried to recapture Blake, but with a strength he shouldn't have had, Blake brought the blade through the water and into the left eye of the old woman. She didn't scream, but she clenched both eyes tight in pain. A thick black goo seeped from the wound and stuck to Blake's hand like ink. Her arms flailed about, so Blake ripped the knife from her face and he jammed it into the other eye. With that, she recoiled. Her hands came to her face to cover her wounds, and the tentacle fell completely away from beyond the light. He was free. He knew his time was short. With his sliced right hand, Blake managed to find the glow stick the beast had dropped by his legs. He brought it to his face just in time to see the tentacle had not yet left him. Another body, a large, overweight man, was soon upon him. His arms reached forth. Their target was Blake's throat. Blake jabbed at the body with the rusted blade, and it retreated fast. Blake enjoyed that. The threat of pain, injury, didn't sit well with the monster. That gave Blake a much-needed edge. Blake knew he couldn't hesitate any further. With a great kick against the block that had imprisoned him, he propelled himself toward the surface, to freedom, to air. He knew at that moment he would survive. Even as the nitrogen started to boil in his blood and as the salt seeped into his fresh wounds, Blake could only think of one thing: the surface breaking around his head, the chilly night sky biting into his scalp, the calming sight of the night sky. The watchful stars would be there, and they would see his final triumph. It would be beautiful. As his body began to betray him, he forced himself through. He knew the tentacle pursued him from below. He could feel it. A presence in the water all around him, hungry, ravenous eyes followed him from below, but he didn't care. He couldn't afford to. His hand was cramping. He found his grip morphing around the light and the knife. He could only hold on to one, so he made a choice. As the knife sunk, Blake grabbed onto the glow stick with both hands. They clung to it like it was a lifeline. The surface was coming. Oh, how close it should have been. Surely only 30 feet, 20, 10. The stars. He should have seen the stars. Instead, only a pained, angry face met his gaze. Blake nearly collided with the corpse that had ambushed him out from the dark. He brought his feet to the corpse's chest and kicked hard against it. He felt the thing's ribs collapse beneath his feet. He circled to his right and tried to rise again. He would make it. He knew he could do it. He found another body. The woman was missing half of her face, but she reached out for him regardless. He dove down as she grasped for his legs. He just barely slipped by. Out of nowhere, a hand reached for his face. His momentum carried him past the man and too close to the tentacle. He flipped around and shot far away. A small amount of water invaded the goggles, and the bends began to stab at his muscle. He could do it. Again, he was ambushed. It shouldn't have been possible. The tentacle was everywhere. It was fast. How was it so fast? Then the light showed him the truth. He retreated into the light's periphery, for in its center a body was reaching for him, a devious smile on its face. To his right, the light revealed another one with twisted fingers and an exposed, jaw-like rib cage. The bodies floated side by side in the water, their arms extended at length. Blake had no choice. He rose, and yet even there, more bodies sat waiting in ambush. The same happened as he swam backwards, too. The bodies all formed a thick wall of nightmares around him. They were too close. One of the bodies struck Blake hard in the ribs in passing, and in a pain that was finally too overwhelming, he dropped the light. Greedy arms took their chance and assaulted him as the light fell. As it sank, it illuminated the inside of what had become a solid wall of flesh. A swirling maelstrom decorated with death had completely surrounded him. There wasn't just one tentacle. There were dozens, and they had contained him inside a giant sphere. His arms and legs were free, but Blake had never felt more trapped. The tentacles swirled. They kept him from the stars. Through his earplugs, he heard a chorus of screams grow from nothing to overtake the white noise. They came from all around him, escaping out of the throats of the long since deceased. Their faces contorted as the ghoulish melody echoed through the waves. It was a tune of pure mockery and triumph, the song of Blake's defeat. He couldn't do it. He never could have. Blake began to sink. His muscles had stopped working. The pain of the bends was too great for his brain to ignore. He burned inside as the tentacles began to constrict their net. He was only vaguely aware as many more pairs of arms began to claw at him and hold him tightly in submission. The corpses never blinked. Behind his eyes, Blake was screaming, not from the pain. He screamed in defiance. He screamed against the cruel irony that had perverted his escape. He saw the light at the bottom of the writhing mass of tentacles. Blake watched as the tentacles parted, allowing the light to fall beyond his reach, beyond his sight. The tentacles closed again and the light died. Blake was in the pitch black, alone with the dead. He couldn't see it, but they started to smile. He felt it when the arms tore the goggles from his face, not that they mattered anymore. The darkness persisted, only the pain was new. The water assaulted his eyes and forced its way up his nose. The salt burned everything that it touched. He only managed to suck in half a breath as they removed the regulator from his face. The breath was spoiled as water was quick to invade his lungs. Blake sputtered and spat, but all that did was expel the last bit of air from his lungs. As they tore the tank from his back, Blake was drowning. He couldn't drown fast enough. Though he couldn't see it, the tentacles positioned him strategically. They moved him up against a large, slimy section of barren flesh. Blake's head felt as though it would explode, and that was before the spines entered his body. One inside, numerous barbed tentacles searched and dug their way into his veins. He felt a warm burning as an alien substance seeped into his veins. Eventually, all of his blood would be lost to the sea, and only the thick blood of the monster would remain. As his head grew dizzy, tiny tendrils dug their way into his spine. The pain was sharp, unbearable as they coiled about his central nervous system like hungry pythons. Blake tried to scream, but there was no air left to give. No sound escaped his curled lips. He had hoped for comfort in death, but as the nerves of the beast found hold inside of him, he found true hell. His mind became one with the others. Left in darkness, death never found Blake. The weight of the water filled his chest, and the sounds of the damned filled his ears. He heard their screams, hundreds of screams. He felt their pain, hundreds of lost souls sacrificed, and they were all connected. He heard their pleas. "Help me! Anyone, please! I'm drowning! I'm drowning! Why am I underwater? Who's there? Is anyone? I want my mom!" He felt his body move, but not at his command. He felt his eyes open, but he saw nothing. He felt his lips forced into a smile, but he was anything but happy. He was left with one choice, the last option he could physically achieve. He called for help. No one would answer him, of course, for his pain was their pain. His fate was theirs. As they sunk into the abyss, one alien voice was forced into his mind. "All is one here in the colony." From their position near the seafloor beyond the ring of light, the two divers had watched as Blake made for the surface. They both knew better than to interfere as they had waited patiently. There was no reason to chase after him. The colony had never allowed anyone to escape before. The situation unseen above was surely well in hand. The blonde-haired diver watched as the lost light sank in front of her. She smiled as it settled. It was done. Moments after a tentacle had crept into their circle, the blonde-haired woman watched as an elderly man was brought forth. Carried between his arms was an old wooden chest. The other diver took the chest gently and allowed it to sink to the ocean floor. With his partner's help, they opened the chest. The contents were much to their liking. They closed the chest and prepared to make their ascent. However, before they went, the tentacles surrounded them in a similar fashion to how they had surrounded Blake. The divers held themselves unnaturally calm as the dead surrounded them, including the recently deceased Blake Gardner. The tentacles seemed to bring him to showcase at the front of the circle. Using his muscles, they forced Blake's right hand outwards, and they extended his fingers up. They made his body wave goodbye before they pulled him into the unknown. This didn't affect the divers at all. Two more bodies were brought to display. They noted the one-armed man who'd lost all but one of his fingers, and the blinded woman. In a sickening motion, the one-armed man's body peeled away from the tentacles. The tendrils retracted from his corpse, and the flesh peeled from around his back. His body was dropped to the floor below, discarded. The man squirmed, but for a moment. They always did that. The woman had often been told it was just a reflex, like a decapitated chicken when it runs. She had other theories, though. She wondered if, for just a moment, the poor souls got control of their bodies back before they became still forever. She honestly didn't care either way. The woman was next. She was useless to the tentacle if she could not see, so she too was abandoned. She settled rather calmly into her sandy grave. As the tentacles left, one final body was brought to the light. On it, a young man, no older than 20, presented his right hand clenched into a fist. On it, he raised 2 fingers towards the divers. The senior diver nodded and held up 2 of his own in acknowledgement. With that, the young man smiled, and the creature disappeared into the trench. The divers packed up 2 more bodies. They had work to do. Well then, that was unnerving. So yeah, we're just gonna act like that wasn't real. Jeez Louise. All right, let's perk it up a little bit here. Yeah, they're pretty creepy. The ocean stories are a little weird. All right, I think my computer's like calmed down a little bit. Let me see if I can like get this thing to work. Just smile and wave. It's like, yep, don't acknowledge it. It's not real. As long as we admit that it's not real, then it's not real. It's okay. At least enough to say goodbye while I like figure out what the heck is going on. But yeah. Aw, it's okay, Gio. You can always go back and listen to the stream. It's fine. But yeah, so that's it for today. I'm a little wore out. I didn't realize that last story was gonna wear me out the way it is. But yeah, I need to figure out what's going on. Like, I think Streamlabs and VTube Studio do not like each other right now. There's some packet loss or something going on. I don't know, but I will figure it out. I will smooth it out because we didn't have this problem yesterday. But yeah, in the meanwhile, thanks again for stopping by. You guys are awesome, and until next time, bye.